The basement smelled like burnt copper and 20 years of my wife's lies. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I crouched next to the electrical panel at 2:30 in the morning, replacing the blown fuse with steady hands that had wired half the commercial buildings in upstate New York. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, James Parish, co-owner of Parish Electrical, fixing a power surge in my own house while my cheating wife thought I was 300 miles away on a job site. The front door slammed upstairs. Beth was home early from her business trip. I heard her heels click across the hardwood, then pause. She'd noticed the lights were back on. Smart girl. Too bad she wasn't smart enough to cover her tracks better. Jay? Her voice carried that fake sweetness she used when she was nervous. Honey, are you home? I didn't answer. Let her sweat a little. The basement stairs creaked under her weight. She appeared at the bottom, still in her business suit, but her makeup was smudged and her hair looked like she'd been running her fingers through it. Or someone else had. What are you doing here? She asked, trying to sound casual. I thought you were in Buffalo until Thursday. I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on an old rag. Finished early. Good thing, too. We had a power surge around midnight. Probably would have fried half the appliances if I hadn't been here to fix it. Beth's face went pale. Midnight was exactly when I'd seen her car pull into Greg Stanton's driveway through the security app on my phone. That's weird, she stammered. I mean, what would cause a surge like that? Oh, you know how it is, I said, keeping my voice conversational. Sometimes the system gets overloaded. Too much current flowing where it shouldn't be. Creates all kinds of problems if you don't isolate the source. She shifted uncomfortably, and I noticed a small bruise on her neck that definitely hadn't been there when she left for her conference 3 days ago. Well, I'm exhausted, she said, backing toward the stairs. Long trip? I'm going to bed. How was Greg? I asked casually. She froze. What? Greg Stanton? Your boss? Wasn't he at the conference too? Yes, he was there. It was a big conference. Lots of people. I bet it was, I smiled. I hope he gave you a good performance review. Something shifted in her expression. The nervous mask slipped, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Actually, he did, she said, straightening her shoulders. In fact, we had several very productive meetings. I'm sure you did. She took a step closer, and I saw the exact moment she decided to go on the offense instead of defense. It was like watching a switch flip. You want to know the truth, Jay? Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried perfectly in the concrete basement. I slept with Greg. Multiple times. And you know what? It was amazing. He actually appreciates me, unlike you with your stupid electrical jokes and your blue-collar friends. I nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. That's it? That's all you have to say? Well, I said, pulling out my phone. I was going to ask if you knew anything about this. I showed her the screen. It was a photo from her burner phone, the one she thought she'd hidden so well in her car's glove compartment. The picture showed her and Greg in what was definitely not a business meeting. Her face went white. Where did you get that? Amazing what people leave lying around, I said, along with text messages about how you two are planning to push me out of my own company. Something about Greg having connections on the board? Beth's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then her expression hardened again. So what? She snapped. You think you can threaten me? Greg has lawyers, Jay. Good ones. And I know things about your business practices that could get you in serious trouble. I laughed. Actually laughed. Beth, sweetheart, you just confessed to adultery and conspiracy to commit fraud in my basement while I was recording. I held up my phone again, showing the red recording icon that had been running since she started talking. You bastard, she hissed. Maybe. But I'm a bastard with evidence, a good lawyer, and a very detailed knowledge of exactly how much power flows through this house. I gestured at the electrical panel. See, the thing about electricity is that it always finds the path of least resistance. And right now, you and Greg are looking pretty conductive. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Finally, she smiled, a cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. You have no idea what you're dealing with, she said quietly. Greg isn't just some middle manager. He has friends, important friends, and I've been planning this a lot longer than you think. Planning what, exactly? Your complete destruction. She turned and walked toward the stairs, then paused and looked back. Enjoy your little recording, Jay, because by the time I'm done with you, nobody's going to care about some grainy basement video. You'll be lucky if you can get a job changing light bulbs at Walmart. She disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the basement with the smell of burnt copper and the sound of my own heartbeat. I looked down at my phone. The recording had captured every word. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office with a pot of coffee and started making lists. By 6 a.m., I had 3 pages of notes and a plan that would have made Sun Tzu proud. The first item on my agenda was a visit to Parish Electrical's headquarters, where I kept the really important files, the ones Beth didn't know about. Carl Morrison was already at the shop when I arrived, bent over the engine of our service truck with a wrench in one hand and a cigarette dangling from his lips. Carl had been my foreman for 15 years and my friend for longer than that. If anyone could help me navigate the minefield my life had become, it was him. "You look like hell," he said without looking up from the engine. "Feel worse. We need to talk." Carl straightened up, took one look at my face, and stubbed out his cigarette. "Coffee or whiskey?" "Coffee, for now." We went into my office, a cluttered space that smelled like motor oil and old coffee. I closed the door and activated the white noise machine I'd installed after Beth started asking too many questions about my business calls. "Beth's cheating on me," I said without preamble. Carl nodded like I'd just told him it was Tuesday. "Greg Stanton?" I stared at him. "How long have you known?" "Couple months. Saw them together at that hotel out on Route 9. Figured you knew and were handling it your own way." He poured coffee from the pot on the filing cabinet. "What's the play?" This was why I loved Carl. No drama, no questions about how I was feeling, just straight to business. "They're trying to push me out of the company," I said, showing him the screenshots from Beth's phone. "Greg's got connections on the board, and Beth's been feeding him information about our contracts and finances." Carl studied the messages, his face growing darker with each one. "That corporate piece of garbage. What do you need from me?" "First, I need to know what they've accessed. Can you pull the security footage from the office for the past month?" "Already on it." Carl moved to the computer on my desk and started typing. "I've been keeping an eye on things since I saw them together." "Look at this." The screen filled with black and white footage from our main office. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, 11:47 p.m. Beth and Greg were clearly visible, using Beth's keycard to access the building. They went straight to my office. "They were in there for 43 minutes, Carl said. "Came back Friday night too, stayed even longer." What could they have gotten? Client lists, contract details, financial records if they knew where to look? Carl's expression was grim. Enough to cause us serious problems if they wanted to. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Parish Electrical wasn't just my business, it was my life's work. I'd built it from nothing, starting with a beat-up van and a toolbox full of second-hand equipment. The idea of Greg Stanton and my cheating wife destroying it made me want to put my fist through the wall. Instead, I started planning. "I need you to change all the access codes," I said, "and I want new locks on the sensitive areas." "Can you handle that today?" "Consider it done." "What else?" "I'm going to need an alibi for this afternoon. Something that puts me here, working with witnesses." Carl grinned. "We've got that big rewiring job at the Morrison building. Perfect excuse to have the whole crew together. Very visible, lots of documentation." "Good, because I'm going to pay Greg a little visit. The Morrison building job was perfect cover." While Carl supervised the crew, I slipped away to do some reconnaissance. Greg Stanton worked for Pinnacle Solutions, a corporate consulting firm that occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower downtown. Beth worked in their HR department, which gave her access to all kinds of sensitive information. I parked across the street and watched the building for an hour, noting the security cameras, the entry points, and the parking garage. Greg drove a silver BMW that probably cost more than most people made in a year. It was parked in a reserved spot near the elevator, because of course it was. I didn't do anything that day, I just watched and learned. That evening, I stopped by the Current, a bar near the industrial district where most of the local contractors drank. It was the kind of place where information flowed as freely as the beer, and I needed to know what people were saying about Parish Electrical. Mrs. Howland was there, which surprised me. She lived in my neighborhood and usually spent her evenings watching other people's business from her front window. "Jay?" she called out when she saw me. "How's Beth? I haven't seen her around much lately." "She's been traveling for work," I said, taking the stool next to her. "You know how it is." "Oh, I know exactly how it is," she said with a meaningful look. "All those late nights, those weekend conferences. Very dedicated to her career, that one." Something in her tone made me pay attention. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Howland leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Well, I don't like to gossip, but I've seen that fancy car in your driveway when you've been out of town. Silver BMW. Very nice." My blood ran cold. When was this? Oh, several times over the past few months. Always late at night, gone by morning. I figured it was one of Beth's work colleagues, maybe working on some big project. She paused. But then I saw the same car at the hotel on Route 9, and I started wondering. I bought Mrs. Howland another drink and listened to everything she had to say. By the time I left the Current, I had a timeline of Greg's visits to my house and a witness who could place them together in public. The pieces were falling into place. Back home, Beth was waiting in the kitchen with a glass of wine and an expression I couldn't read. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm listening." This morning was intense. I said some things I shouldn't have said. "You mean like confessing to adultery and conspiracy?" She flinched. I was angry. "You ambushed me." "I fixed a fuse, Beth. You're the one who decided to confess your sins." "Look," she said, setting down her wine glass. "Maybe we can work this out. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over." "What about Greg?" "That's over. It was just a mistake, a midlife crisis or something." I studied her face. She was lying, of course. I could tell because her left eye twitched slightly when she lied, a tell I'd learned after 15 years of marriage. "Okay," I said. "Okay, let's work it out. But I need some time to process everything. Maybe you could stay at your sister's for a few days while I figure out how I feel about all this." Relief flooded her features. "Yes, of course. That's probably a good idea." "Great. Why don't you pack a bag tonight? I'll help you carry it to the car." She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. "Thank you, Jay. I know we can fix this." After she went upstairs to pack, I sat in the kitchen and finished her wine. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Howland's house, where a light was still on in her front room. She was probably watching, wondering what drama was unfolding in the Parish household. She'd find out soon enough. Beth left the next morning with 2 suitcases and a promise to call me every day. I waved goodbye from the front porch, playing the part of the wounded but hopeful husband. Mrs. Howland was watering her plants and definitely not eavesdropping. As soon as Beth's car disappeared around the corner, I went back inside and made a phone call. "Deke? It's Jay. I need a favor." Derek Morrison was Carl's younger brother and my brother-in-law's former partner on the police force. These days, he ran a private security company, which meant he had access to resources that weren't exactly available to the general public. "What kind of favor?" Deke asked. "The kind that requires discretion and possibly some creative interpretation of surveillance laws." There was a pause. "Oh, I'll be right over." Deke arrived 30 minutes later with a duffel bag full of equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. He was a compact man with prematurely gray hair and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "So," he said, setting up what looked like a small computer on my kitchen table, "Carl tells me your wife's been playing house with some corporate asshole. That's the polite version. And you want to do something about it." "I want to do several things about it. Legal things. Things that will hold up in court and destroy them both professionally." Deke grinned. "My favorite kind of revenge. Tell me what you need." What I needed was evidence. Lots of it. The kind that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Over the next 2 hours, Deke installed surveillance equipment in my house that would make the NSA jealous. Cameras, audio recorders, motion sensors, all of it invisible and all of it legal, since it was my house. "The beauty of the system," Deke explained, "is that it's completely passive. It just records everything and stores it in the cloud. If someone happens to come into your house and say or do something incriminating, well, that's their problem." "What about their phones?" "Can't help you there. That would be illegal." He paused. But if someone were to accidentally leave their phone somewhere and it happened to sync with a nearby device, that would be a technical malfunction, not surveillance. I loved my brother-in-law. That afternoon, I put the first part of my plan into action. I called Beth. "Hi, honey," I said when she answered. "How are you settling in at your sister's?" "Oh, fine." She's being very supportive. Beth's voice sounded strained. "How are you doing?" "Better, actually." "I've been thinking about what you said about working things out. Maybe you're right. Maybe we can fix this." "Really?" "Really. In fact, I was thinking we should meet and talk about it properly. You know, clear the air, discuss our future." "That sounds wonderful. When?" "How about tonight?" "We could meet at that little park downtown, the one with the gazebo, neutral territory." "Perfect. What time?" 7 o'clock. I'll be there." After I hung up, I called Greg's office. "Pinnacle Solutions, this is Jennifer." "Hi, Jennifer, this is Jay Parish. I need to speak with Greg Stanton about a business matter. I'm sorry, Mr. Parish, but Mr. Stanton is in meetings all afternoon. Could you give him a message? Tell him it's about his relationship with my wife, and that I'd like to meet with him tonight at 7 to discuss our mutual interests. There was a long pause. I'll make sure he gets the message. Thank you. Oh, and Jennifer, tell him it's at the park downtown, by the gazebo. He'll know the one. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Carl helped me set up additional recording equipment around the gazebo, disguised as routine maintenance work. To anyone watching, we were just city contractors doing our job. At 6:30, I was sitting on a bench near the gazebo, watching the entrance to the park. Deke was positioned across the street with a telephoto lens, and Carl was in a van nearby with the recording equipment. Beth arrived first, looking nervous, but determined. She'd changed clothes since morning and was wearing a dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The irony was almost too much. Jay? She called out as she approached the gazebo. Over here. She sat down next to me on the bench, leaving careful space between us. Thank you for calling, she said. I wasn't sure you would. I've been thinking about what you said. About fixing things. And I realized you're right. We can fix this. But first, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Greg arrived 10 minutes later, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was a tall man with perfect hair and a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Everything about him screamed corporate success and entitled arrogance. Beth, he said, ignoring me completely. What's this about? Greg, this is my husband, Jay. I know who he is. Greg's voice was cold. What I don't know is why I'm here. Because, I said, standing up, I think it's time we all had an honest conversation about the situation. Greg looked at Beth, then back at me. I don't know what you think you know. I know you've been sleeping with my wife, I interrupted. I know you've been using her to get information about my company, and I know you've been planning to use that information to destroy my business. That's ridiculous. Is it? I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the screenshots from Beth's messages, because this text from last Tuesday suggests otherwise. Greg's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. Even if that were true, which I'm not saying it is, what exactly do you think you can do about it? Well, for starters, I could report your unethical conduct to your company's board of directors. I'm sure they'd be very interested to know that one of their senior managers has been engaging in corporate espionage. You have no proof of that, don't I? I showed him another screenshot. This one's particularly interesting. It's Beth telling you about our contract with Morrison Industries, including the confidential pricing information that somehow ended up in Pinnacle's competing bid. Beth grabbed my arm. Jay, please, let's just talk about this privately. No, I said, shaking her off. I'm tired of private conversations. I think it's time everything came out in the open. Greg stepped closer, and I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp scent of fierce sweat. Listen, you blue-collar piece of trash, he said quietly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections you can't even imagine. I can make one phone call and destroy your pathetic little business overnight. Interesting theory, I said. But here's the thing about connections, Greg. They work both ways. I gestured toward the street where Deke was clearly visible with his camera. See that man over there? He's been documenting this entire conversation. Every word, every gesture, every threat you've just made. Greg spun around, finally noticing the surveillance. You're recording this? Oh, I'm doing much more than that, I smiled. See, the thing about being in the electrical business is that you learn a lot about power systems. Not just electrical power, but all kinds of power. Political power, economic power, social power. I pulled out a small device that looked like a garage door opener. This, for example, is connected to the sound system in the gazebo, the one that broadcasts announcements during city events. I pressed the button, and speakers hidden around the park crackled to life. Testing, testing, my voice echoed across the park, amplified and crystal clear. Greg's eyes went wide. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? I held up my phone again. I have hours of recorded conversations between you and my wife, detailed discussions of your affair, your plans to sabotage my business, and your complete lack of respect for anyone you consider beneath you. Jay, please, Beth whispered. People will hear. That's the idea. I looked at Greg. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end your relationship with my wife immediately. You're going to return any information you've stolen from my company. And you're going to withdraw Pinnacle's bid on the Morrison contract. And if I don't? I pressed the button again, and Greg's voice filled the park. Listen, you blue-collar piece of trash. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Several people, walking their dogs, stopped and looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. That's just a sample, I said. I have much better material. Greg looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. This is blackmail. No, this is consequences. I turned to Beth. And as for you, sweetheart, here's what's going to happen. You're going to move out of our house permanently. You're going to file for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences, and you're going to accept whatever settlement I'm willing to offer. Jay, you can't be serious. Or, I continued, I can play the rest of these recordings right here, right now, for everyone in the park to hear, including the part where you discuss using your HR position to plant false harassment claims against my employees. Beth's face crumpled. That was just talk. We never actually... Doesn't matter. The intent was there, and it's all recorded. Greg suddenly lunged forward, grabbing for my phone. Give me that. I stepped aside, and Greg stumbled past me, tripping over the edge of the fountain and falling face first into the water with a tremendous splash. He came up sputtering, his perfect hair plastered to his head, his expensive suit soaked and ruined. A small crowd had gathered, and someone was definitely taking pictures. Oops, I said. Careful there, Greg. These old fountains can be tricky. Carl appeared from behind the van, grinning widely. Everything okay over here, boss? Just fine, Carl. Mr. Stanton was just leaving. Greg hauled himself out of the fountain, water streaming from his clothes. His face was red with humiliation and rage. This isn't over, he snarled. Yes, it is, I said calmly, because tomorrow morning I'm delivering copies of everything to your board of directors, your HR department, and anyone else who might be interested. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to handle this quietly. Greg looked at Beth, who was staring at him with an expression of horror and disgust. His perfect corporate image was literally dripping away in front of her eyes. Fine, he said finally. What do you want? I already told you. End it with my wife, return my property, and stay out of my business. Done. Greg turned to Beth. We're finished. Don't call me, don't text me, don't even look at me if you see me in the office. Greg, wait. But he was already walking away, leaving a trail of water and wounded pride behind him. Beth turned to me, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to me? I didn't do anything to you, Beth. You did it to yourself, but everyone will know. Everyone will talk. Yes, they will. That's what happens when you make choices. There are consequences. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when her sadness transformed into pure hatred. You think you're so smart, she whispered. You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I do. I've been married to you for 15 years. She slapped me then, hard enough to leave a mark. Several people in the crowd gasped. I hope you're proud of yourself, she said. I am, actually. Beth turned and walked away, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. I watched her go, feeling something that might have been relief. Carl clapped me on the shoulder. Hell of a show, boss. What's next? I looked at my phone, where a text message was waiting. It was from my lawyer, and it contained news that would change everything. Next, I said, we go to war. The text from my lawyer was short and to the point. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Greg Stanton filed complaints against you. Need to meet tonight. I stared at the message, feeling the first real jolt of fear since this whole mess started. A board meeting meant Greg had moved faster than I'd expected, and it meant he had more influence than I'd realized. Problem? Carl asked, reading my expression. Big one. Greg's trying to get me removed from the company. Can he do that? If he's got enough board members on his side, yeah, he can. We drove back to the shop in silence, both of us thinking hard. Parish Electrical had a 5-member board of directors, myself, my original business partner Tom Bradley, and 3 outside investors who'd helped us expand 5 years ago. Tom would never vote against me, but the other 3 were businessmen first and friends second. My lawyer, David Chen, was waiting in the parking lot when we arrived. David was a small, intense man who'd helped me navigate every major business decision for the past decade. If he was worried enough to drive over here at 8 o'clock at night, the situation was serious. How bad is it? I asked as we walked into the office. Bad. Greg Stanton has filed formal complaints with the board alleging financial improprieties, hostile work environment, and abuse of company resources for personal gain. That's all bullshit, and he knows it. Of course it is. But he's got documentation, Jay. Financial records, employee statements, even security footage that allegedly shows you using company equipment for personal projects. I felt the blood drain from my face. What kind of documentation? David opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Bank records showing unusual cash withdrawals from company accounts, invoices for materials that can't be accounted for in any current projects, and witness statements from employees claiming you've been acting erratically and making threats. I flipped through the papers, recognizing my own signature on several documents. But the context was all wrong, the numbers twisted to suggest impropriety where none existed. "This is all taken out of context," I said. "These withdrawals were for the Henderson project, and those materials were for the emergency repair at the courthouse. I can prove all of this." "Can you?" "Because according to this, there's no record of those projects in your official files." A cold realization hit me. They've been in my office. Beth and Greg. They had access to everything. And they've been very selective about what they've preserved and what they've made disappear. Carl leaned forward. "What about the security footage we have of them breaking in?" "That helps, but it's not enough. We need to prove they altered or destroyed records, and that's going to be difficult without knowing exactly what they took." I sat back in my chair, mind racing. Greg was smarter than I'd given him credit for. While I'd been focused on his affair with Beth, he'd been systematically building a case against me using my own company's resources. "What's our timeline?" I asked. "The board meeting is at 9 a.m. That gives us about 12 hours to build a defense." "Then we'd better get started." We worked through the night, going through every file, every invoice, every piece of documentation we could find. Carl proved invaluable, his detailed knowledge of our projects helping to reconstruct the missing pieces of the puzzle. By 6 a.m., we had a solid defense prepared. More importantly, we had evidence of our own. "Look at this," Carl said, pointing to a series of invoices on his computer screen. "These are all materials ordered for projects that Greg's company bid on. But look at the dates. They were ordered before the bids were even submitted." "Someone was feeding them inside information," David said. "Someone named Beth Parish," I replied grimly. At 8:30, I walked into the Parish electrical conference room wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase full of evidence. The 5 board members were already seated around the polished oak table: Tom Bradley, looking worried; Margaret Santos, our accountant-turned-investor; Robert Kim, who owned a chain of hardware stores; and James Mitchell, a retired contractor who'd been one of our first major clients. Greg Stanton sat at the far end of the table with his own lawyer, looking confident and well-rested. He'd changed into a dry suit since his impromptu swim in the fountain, and his hair was once again perfectly styled. "Gentlemen, lady," Greg began, "thank you for taking the time to address this serious matter. As I outlined in my complaint, I have reason to believe that Jay Parish has been using company resources for personal gain and creating a hostile work environment that threatens the integrity of this organization." He proceeded to lay out his case, with the skill of a seasoned corporate politician. Financial irregularities, missing documentation, employee complaints. He painted a picture of a company owner who'd lost control and was putting the entire business at risk. It was a masterful performance, and I could see it was having an effect on the board members. Margaret Santos looked particularly concerned, her pen moving rapidly as she took notes. When Greg finished, Tom Bradley turned to me. "Jay, these are serious allegations. What's your response?" I stood up slowly, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "My response is that Greg Stanton is a liar, a thief, and a corporate saboteur who's been using my wife to steal confidential information from this company." The room went silent. "That's a serious accusation," Margaret said. "What? It's also provable." I opened my briefcase and began distributing copies of the evidence we'd assembled. These are phone records showing extensive communication between Greg and my wife over the past 6 months. These are photographs of them entering this building after hours using Beth's access card. And these are copies of text messages discussing specific details of our bids and contracts. Greg's lawyer leaned forward. "How did you obtain these text messages?" "They were voluntarily provided by my wife during our separation proceedings," David answered smoothly. "It wasn't technically a lie. Beth had left her phone in my house, and I'd copied everything before returning it." I continued my presentation, methodically destroying Greg's credibility while building my own defense. The missing financial records? They'd been deliberately removed from my office during the after-hours visits. The employee complaints? They'd been fabricated or taken out of context. "But here's the most interesting part," I said, pulling out the final piece of evidence. "Carl, would you please explain what you discovered about the Morrison Industries bid?" Carl stood up, clearly nervous but determined. "Last month, we submitted a sealed bid for the Morrison Industries electrical upgrade. Our bid was $47,000. Pinnacle Solutions somehow submitted a bid for $46,500, exactly $500 less than ours." "That's not unusual," Robert Kim said. "Companies often bid competitively." "You're right," I said. "But look at this." I displayed a series of invoices on the projector screen. These are material orders placed by Pinnacle Solutions for the Morrison project. Orders placed 3 days before bids were even due, and in quantities that exactly match our specifications. The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret Santos looked up from her notes, frowning. How would they know your specifications? Because someone with access to our files gave them copies of our entire bid package. I turned to look directly at Greg, someone who thought they could use my own company's information to destroy me. Greg's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. You're just trying to deflect attention from your own incompetence. Am I? I pressed a button on the projector remote, and the screen filled with a photograph of Greg and Beth in my office at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. This is corporate espionage, Greg. And in New York State, it's a felony. The room fell silent again. Greg's lawyer was frantically taking notes, probably calculating how much trouble his client was in. Tom Bradley cleared his throat. Jay, assuming all of this is true, what do you want from this board? I want Greg Stanton barred from any future business dealings with Parish Electrical. I want Pinnacle Solutions investigated for corporate espionage. And I want a formal apology for the damage this has done to my reputation. And if we don't agree, Margaret asked, then I'll take this evidence to the district attorney and let them sort it out. Corporate espionage carries a sentence of up to 7 years in prison. Greg shot to his feet. This is extortion. No, I said calmly. This is consequences. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. When they returned, Tom Bradley was smiling. The board has voted unanimously to reject all complaints against Jay Parish and to pursue legal action against Pinnacle Solutions for corporate espionage. Greg's face went white. You can't be serious. Very serious, Margaret Santos said. Mr. Stanton, you and your company are hereby banned from any future dealings with Parish Electrical or any of our subsidiary companies. Greg looked around the room desperately, then focused his rage on me. This isn't over, Parish. You think you're so clever, but you have no idea what you've started. Actually, I think I'm finishing what you started. Greg stormed out, his lawyer trailing behind him like a worried puppy. The board members began packing up their papers, talking quietly among themselves. Tom Bradley approached me as the room emptied. Hell of a thing, Jay. How long did you know? About the affair? A few days. About the corporate espionage? I figured it out last night. What are you going to do about Beth? I looked out the conference room window at the parking lot, where Greg was gesticulating wildly at his lawyer. I'm going to let her dig her own grave, I said, just like she's been doing all along. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Beth. We need to talk. Meet me at the house tonight. I showed the message to Tom, who whistled low. You going to meet her? Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I spent the afternoon at the Morrison Industries job site, ostensibly supervising the electrical work, but actually thinking about Beth's message. We need to talk could mean a lot of things, but given the morning's board meeting, I suspected it meant she was desperate. Desperate people do stupid things, and stupid things leave evidence. Carl found me in the main electrical room, staring at a junction box without really seeing it. Penny for your thoughts, boss. Just wondering what Beth's next move is going to be. You think she's got another move? She's always got another move. That's what made her good at HR. She could always find an angle nobody else saw. And what made her bad at marriage? Same thing. Carl laughed, but his expression grew serious. You want me to stick around tonight? In case things get ugly? No, but thanks. I can handle Beth. It's not Beth I'm worried about. If Greg's as connected as he claims to be, he might try something stupid. I considered this. Greg had struck me as the type who was used to getting his way through money and influence rather than direct confrontation, but desperate people were unpredictable. Actually, yeah. Can you and Deke set up some surveillance? Nothing obvious, just in case. Already on it. Deke's been monitoring your house since this morning. You guys are paranoid. We're careful. There's a difference. I got home at 6:30 to find Beth's car in the driveway and the front door unlocked. She was in the kitchen, cooking dinner like nothing had happened. The smell of pot roast filled the air, and for a moment I was transported back to the early years of our marriage, when coming home to Beth cooking was the best part of my day. Smells good, I said, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. Your favorite, she replied without turning around. I thought we should have a proper meal while we talk. Talk about what? About how we're going to fix this mess. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where we'd paid bills and planned vacations and argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash. I'm not sure it can be fixed, Beth. She turned around then, and I saw that she'd been crying, Her eyes were red and swollen, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the exhaustion in her face. Of course it can be fixed. We just need to be smart about it. Smart how? She sat down across from me, reaching for my hands. I let her take them, curious to see where this was going. Look, I know I made mistakes. Big mistakes. But Greg made me promises he couldn't keep, and I got caught up in something I didn't understand. You understood enough to steal confidential information from my company. I never stole anything. Greg asked me questions about your business, and I answered them. I didn't know he was using the information to compete against you. It was a good lie, delivered with just the right amount of wounded innocence. If I hadn't seen the text messages, I might have believed her. What about the after-hours visits to my office? Greg said he wanted to understand your operation better, to see if there were ways Pinnacle could partner with Parish Electrical instead of competing. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. Tears started flowing again. I wanted to believe that I could help both of you, that maybe we could all benefit from working together. What about the affair? She looked down at the table. That was a mistake. Greg was charming, and he paid attention to me in ways that you hadn't in years. But it didn't mean anything, Jay. It was just physical. Just physical. Yes, you're the one I love. You're the one I want to be with. I studied her face, looking for any sign of sincerity. What I saw instead was calculation. Beth was playing a role, trying to find the right combination of words and emotions to get what she wanted. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. We go away. Take a vacation, maybe a long cruise. Let this whole thing blow over. When we come back, we can start fresh. What about Greg? What about him? He's finished. You destroyed him today, Jay. His career, his reputation, everything. He's got nothing left to offer me. And if I don't want to start fresh? Her grip on my hands tightened. Then we'll both lose everything. The divorce will be messy and expensive. Your business will suffer from all the negative publicity. My career will be ruined. Nobody wins. Except you'll get half of everything in the divorce. I don't want half of everything. I want my husband back. It was a masterful performance, and I found myself almost admiring her skill. Beth had always been good at reading people, at finding their weaknesses and exploiting them. She was betting that I still loved her enough to forgive her, that my desire to avoid a messy divorce would override my anger at her betrayal. She was wrong, but I wasn't ready to let her know that yet. I need time to think about it, I said. Relief flooded her face. Of course. Take all the time you need. I mean real time. A few days, maybe a week. Whatever you need. In the meantime, I think you should stay at your sister's, just until I sort through my feelings. If that's what you want. We ate dinner in relative silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Beth kept glancing at me, probably trying to gauge my mood while I wondered what her real plan was, because Beth always had a real plan. After dinner, she went upstairs to pack another bag. I cleaned up the kitchen and waited for her to make her next move. She came back down 20 minutes later with a small suitcase and her laptop bag. I'll call you tomorrow, she said, kissing me on the cheek. Sure. I watched from the front window as she loaded her car and drove away. As soon as her taillights disappeared around the corner, my phone buzzed. She's gone, I said, answering Deke's call. Copy that. Carl's in position at the office, and I'm staying on your house tonight. You really think that's necessary? Better safe than sorry. Besides, I've got a feeling tonight's going to be interesting. He was right. At 11:30, my security system alerted me to movement in the backyard. I checked the cameras and saw two figures dressed in dark clothing approaching the back door. One of them was definitely Beth. The other looked like Greg. I called Deke immediately. I see them, he said before I could speak. Police are 5 minutes out. No police, not yet. I want to see what they're after. Jay, this is breaking and entering. Let me call it in. Give me 10 minutes. If they find what they're looking for and leave, we'll have them on felony charges. If we call the police now, they'll just claim Beth was retrieving personal property. I could hear Deke sigh over the phone. 10 minutes, then I'm making the call. I turned off all the lights in the house and crept to the kitchen window. Beth was using her key to unlock the back door while Greg stood watch. They moved through the house like they knew exactly where they were going, which of course they did. They went straight to my home office, where I kept backup files for all my business records. Beth opened the filing cabinet while Greg started going through my desk. Where is it? I heard Greg whisper. It should be in the Morrison file, Beth whispered back. I don't see any Morrison file. Try the computer. Greg sat down at my desk and started typing. What he didn't know was that my computer was equipped with keystroke logging software. and every password he tried was being recorded. They spent 15 minutes searching through everything, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, Greg stood up. "It's not here." He must have moved everything after the board meeting. "Or he never kept copies at home," Beth said. "You said he always kept backup files here." "He used to. Maybe he got smarter." Greg turned toward the window, and in the dim light from the street lamp, I could see his face clearly. He looked desperate and angry, a dangerous combination. "This is your fault," he hissed at Beth. "You said you could handle him." I tried. "But Jay's not as stupid as I thought." "No, he's not." "Which means we need to try a different approach." "What kind of approach?" Greg pulled something from his jacket pocket. In the darkness, I couldn't see what it was, but Beth stepped back quickly. "Are you insane?" she whispered. "Desperate times, Beth. Your husband has destroyed my career and my reputation. I've got nothing left to lose." "Put that away." This was supposed to be simple. Get in, find the files, get out. "The files aren't here, but we can still send him a message. I'd heard enough." I stepped into the hallway and flipped on all the lights. "Looking for something?" Beth screamed. Greg spun around, and I could see now that he was holding a crowbar. "Jay," Beth gasped. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can." "You always could." I pulled out my phone. "Deke, call the police now." Greg raised the crowbar. "I don't think so." "Greg, don't," Beth pleaded. "This will only make things worse." "Worse? How could things possibly get worse? I've lost my job, my reputation, everything, all because of your husband and his little revenge scheme." "You lost everything because you're a thief and a liar," I said calmly. "And now you're about to add breaking and entering to your resume." Greg took a step toward me. "Maybe I should add assault to the list while I'm at it." "I wouldn't recommend it." "Why not?" "What are you going to do, call the police? By the time they get here, you'll be in the hospital and will be long gone." "Actually," said a voice from behind him, "the police are already here." Greg spun around to see Deke standing in the doorway, his service weapon drawn and pointed at Greg's chest. "Drop the crowbar and put your hands where I can see them." Greg looked around desperately, realizing he was trapped. For a moment, I thought he might try to use the crowbar anyway. Then his shoulders sagged, and he let it fall to the floor. "Hands behind your head, both of you." Two uniformed officers appeared behind Deke, and within minutes, Greg and Beth were in handcuffs. "Jay Parish," one of the officers asked. "That's me. We'll need a statement from you about what happened here." "Of course. But first, there's something you should see." I led them to my home office where the security cameras had recorded everything. Greg's threats, Beth's admission that she'd helped him break in, their search through my private files, all of it was captured in high-definition video. "This should make your case pretty straightforward," the officer said. As they led Greg and Beth out to the patrol cars, Beth looked back at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Jay. I never wanted it to go this far." "Yes, you did," I replied. "You just never thought you'd get caught." The police cars disappeared into the night, taking my cheating wife and her corporate lover with them. I stood in my driveway for a long time, looking up at the stars and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in just a few days. Deke appeared beside me, holstering his weapon. "How do you feel?" "Tired. Relieved. Vindicated. And like this isn't over yet." "What makes you say that?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a text message that had arrived while we were dealing with the police. "This is from Beth's lawyer. Apparently, she's claiming that I set this whole thing up to frame her. She's going to fight the charges and the divorce." Deke whistled low. "She doesn't give up, does she?" "Never has. That's what made her good at her job." "So what's your next move?" I smiled, thinking about the final piece of evidence I hadn't shared with anyone yet, the one that would end this once and for all. "Yeah, I'm going to give her exactly what she wants," I said. "A fight." The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Jay, it's David. We need to meet immediately." My lawyer's voice was tense in a way I'd never heard before. David Chen was usually unflappable, the kind of man who could discuss felony charges over coffee like he was talking about the weather. "What's wrong?" Beth's made a countermove, a big one. "Can you be at my office in an hour?" "I'll be there in 30 minutes. David's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood and leather-bound law books. He was waiting for me with a pot of coffee and a stack of legal documents that looked thick enough to choke a horse. "Sit down, Jay." "This is going to be unpleasant." I sat. "How unpleasant?" "Beth's filed for divorce on grounds of mental cruelty and domestic abuse. She's claiming that you've been psychologically tormenting her for months, that you set up elaborate schemes to humiliate her, and that last night's break-in was actually a setup designed to frame her for crimes she didn't commit. I stared at him. That's insane. It gets worse. She's also filed a restraining order against you, claiming that you've made threats against her life. And she's demanding immediate spousal support, temporary custody of all marital assets, and exclusive use of the family home. Custody of what? We don't have kids. Marital assets. The house, the business, everything you own jointly. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Can she do that? If she can prove her claims, yes. And Jay, she's got evidence. David opened the file and spread out a series of photographs. They showed me at various locations over the past week, outside Greg's office building, at the park during our confrontation, at my own house with surveillance equipment. Where did these come from? She hired a private investigator, someone who's been following you since this whole thing started. Following me? When? According to the timestamps, since the day after your basement confrontation. She's documented every move you've made, every person you've talked to, every piece of equipment you've used. I studied the photos more carefully. They were professionally taken, high-quality images that made me look calculating and predatory. In one, I was talking to Deke outside his security company. In another, I was setting up recording equipment at the park. Taken out of context, they painted a picture of a man engaged in systematic harassment. There's more, David said grimly. She's got audio recordings. He pressed play on a small digital recorder. My own voice filled the room. I'm going to destroy them both professionally. I want Greg Stanton barred from any future business dealings. This isn't over. I'm going to let her dig her own grave. Jesus, where did she get these? Your house is bugged, Jay. Has been for weeks. She's recorded dozens of conversations between you and Carl, you and Deke, you and me. I felt the blood drain from my face. While I'd been setting up surveillance on Beth, she'd been doing the same thing to me, and she'd been doing it longer. Is any of this admissible in court? Some of it. The photos are definitely admissible. They were taken in public places. The audio recordings are more complicated, but since they were made in her own home, she might have a legal right to them. So what's our defense? Truth? We prove that everything you did was a reasonable response to her adultery and corporate espionage. And if we can't prove it, David's expression was grim, then you could lose everything. The house, the business, your reputation. Beth's playing for keeps, Jay. I sat back in my chair, mind racing. Beth had been 3 steps ahead of me from the beginning, setting up this elaborate counterattack while I thought I was outmaneuvering her. There's something else, David continued. Greg Stanton made bail this morning, and he's disappeared. Disappeared? His lawyer says he's checked into a private facility for stress-related issues, but nobody knows where. The police can't find him. What does that mean for us? It means our star witness against Beth is gone. Without Greg's testimony, it's going to be much harder to prove the corporate espionage angle. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where normal people were going about their normal lives. 24 hours ago, I'd thought I was winning. Now I was facing the possibility of losing everything I'd worked for. What do you recommend? Settlement. Cut your losses and try to salvage what you can. What kind of settlement? 50-50 split of all assets, including the business. Alimony payments for 5 years. And a public apology for what she's calling your campaign of harassment. Absolutely not. Jay, be realistic. If this goes to trial and she wins, you could end up with nothing. Then we make sure she doesn't win. David sighed. How do you propose we do that? I turned back to face him, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. By giving her exactly what she wants. A public trial where all the evidence comes out. That's suicide, Jay. She's got more evidence than we do. Does she? Let me ask you something, David. In all those recordings she made, did she ever record herself? David frowned. What do you mean? I mean, did she record any conversations where she admits to the affair, discusses the corporate espionage, or talks about her plans to destroy me? I don't know. Her lawyer only provided excerpts that support her case. Exactly. Which means there's a lot more on those recordings that we haven't heard. Even if there is, how do we get access to it? Discovery. If she wants to use those recordings as evidence, she has to provide the complete, unedited versions. David's eyes lit up. You think she incriminated herself? I know she did. Beth's biggest weakness has always been her ego. She can't resist explaining how clever she is, especially when she thinks she's winning. It's a huge gamble, Jay. So is settling. At least this way, we go down fighting. David studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, we fight. But I need you to understand the risks. If we lose, you lose everything. And if we win, then Beth loses everything instead. Good, because it's time she learned what consequences really look like. The trial was set for 6 weeks later, which gave us time to prepare our case and Beth time to prepare hers. The local media picked up the story, turning it into a soap opera of adultery, corporate espionage, and revenge. Electrical contractor's marriage sparks legal fireworks, read the headline in the local paper. The article painted me as either a wronged husband seeking justice or a controlling abuser seeking revenge, depending on which paragraph you read. Carl found me in my office one morning, staring at the newspaper coverage. How you holding up, boss? Been better. How's the crew taking all this? They're behind you 100%. Nobody believes Beth's story. What about the business? Are we losing clients? Carl's expression darkened. A few. The Morrison Industries contract got pulled. They said they didn't want to be associated with the controversy. I felt a stab of anger. Morrison Industries had been one of our biggest clients, and losing their contract would hurt. Anyone else? 3 smaller jobs got canceled, but we've also had some new inquiries from people who think you're getting screwed over. So we're breaking even on public opinion? For now. But Jay, if you lose this trial... I know. The business won't survive. That afternoon I got an unexpected visitor. Margaret Santos, the accountant who sat on our board of directors, knocked on my office door. Margaret, what brings you here? I wanted to talk to you about the trial. I can't discuss the details, you know that. I'm not here about the details. I'm here about the company. She sat down across from my desk, her expression serious. Jay, I've been thinking about what happens if you lose. Parish Electrical employs 47 people. If the company goes under because of this legal mess, those are 47 families that lose their income. I'm aware of that. Are you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're more interested in revenge than in protecting your employees. I felt a flash of anger. Beth started this war, not me. Maybe, but you're the one escalating it. You could settle this quietly and keep the company intact. At the cost of admitting to things I didn't do? At the cost of your pride, yes. It's not about pride, Margaret. It's about truth. Truth doesn't pay salaries, Jay. She left me alone with that thought, and I spent the rest of the day wrestling with it. Was I being selfish? Was my desire for vindication worth the risk to my employees? That evening, I called a meeting with Carl and Deke at the Current. The bar was nearly empty on a Tuesday night. Just a few regulars nursing beers and watching a baseball game on the television above the bar. Margaret Santos came to see me today, I told them. She thinks I should settle. Margaret Santos is a bean counter, Carl said dismissively. She doesn't understand what's at stake here. What's at stake is 47 jobs, I replied. If I lose this trial, the company goes under. And if you settle, you admit to being an abuser, Deke pointed out. Your reputation is destroyed either way. At least my employees keep their jobs. Carl leaned forward. Jay, you've been my friend for 20 years. I've never seen you back down from a fight when you knew you were right. This is different. How? Because this time, other people pay the price if I lose. Deke signaled the bartender for another round. Let me ask you something, Jay. What do you think happens to Parish Electrical if you settle? It survives. Maybe not in the same form, but it survives. Wrong. It dies slowly instead of quickly. Because once you admit to being an abuser, even falsely, you become toxic. Clients won't want to work with you. Suppliers will be nervous about extending credit. Employees will start looking for other jobs. He's right, Carl added. Settlement might save the company in the short term, but it kills it in the long term. So what are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the only way to save something is to risk losing it completely. I stared into my beer, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a successful businessman with a stable marriage and a bright future. Now I was facing the possibility of losing everything. There's something I haven't told you guys, I said finally. What? I've got one more piece of evidence. Something Beth doesn't know about. Carl and Deke exchanged glances. What kind of evidence? Deke asked. I pulled out my phone and showed them a small app icon. Remember the white noise machine in my office? The one I installed after Beth started asking questions about my business calls? Yeah. It's not just a white noise machine. It's also a recording device. Has been for 2 years. Jesus, Jay. Please tell me you didn't record attorney-client conversations. No, nothing like that. But I did record every conversation Beth and I had in that office, including the ones where she admitted to the affair and discussed her plans with Greg. Carl grinned. You sneaky bastard. Why haven't you told your lawyer about this? Deke asked. Because I wanted to see what Beth's strategy was first. Now I know. And tomorrow, David Chen is going to have a very interesting conversation with Beth's lawyer about discovery and evidence. The next morning, I sat in David's office while he made the call. Beth's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Walsh, was not pleased to learn about the additional recordings. My client was unaware that she was being recorded, Walsh said over the speakerphone. Your client was in her husband's private office, discussing matters related to his business, David replied smoothly. The recordings were made for security purposes, which is perfectly legal. We'll challenge the admissibility. You're welcome to try, but given that your client has been using illegally obtained recordings as the basis for her case, I don't think you want to open that particular door. There was a long pause. What exactly is on these recordings? Walsh asked finally. Why don't you listen for yourself? David pressed play on his computer. Beth's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Greg thinks he can use the Morrison contract information to underbid Parish Electrical by just enough to win the job. Then, once Jay's reputation is damaged by losing contracts, the board will be more receptive to removing him as CEO. Another voice, which I recognized as Greg Stanton's, responded, And you're sure you can get me the detailed specifications? I've got copies of everything. Jay trusts me completely. The fool never even changed his filing system after we got married. The recording continued for several more minutes, documenting in Beth's own words her plan to destroy my business and steal my assets. When it finished, the silence on the phone was deafening. Miss Walsh, David prompted, we'll need to review our position. I'm sure you will. In the meantime, I'll be filing a motion to dismiss all charges against my client and a countersuit for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. After Walsh hung up, David turned to me with a grin. I think it's safe to say that Beth's legal strategy just hit a major snag. What happens now? Now we wait. My guess is that Walsh will try to negotiate a settlement that keeps Beth out of prison. And if she doesn't, then we go to trial and destroy her in front of a jury. 2 days later, Patricia Walsh called back with a settlement offer. Beth would drop all charges against me, agree to an uncontested divorce with no alimony, and accept a minimal property settlement in exchange for my agreement not to pursue criminal charges. What do you think? David asked after outlining the offer. I think Beth's finally learned what consequences look like. So you accept? I thought about it for a moment, weighing my desire for complete vindication against the practical benefits of ending this mess quickly and quietly. Counteroffer, I said finally. Beth gets nothing except her personal belongings. No money, no property, no alimony. She also signs a non-disclosure agreement preventing her from discussing our marriage or my business practices with anyone, including the media. That's harsh, Jay. So was sleeping with my business rival and trying to destroy my company. What about criminal charges? I won't pursue them if she accepts the settlement and disappears from my life permanently. David made the call. An hour later, we had a deal. 3 weeks after that, I stood in a courtroom and watched a judge sign the papers that officially ended my marriage to Beth Parish. She wasn't there. Her lawyer said she'd already left town for a fresh start somewhere else. Outside the courthouse, Carl and Deke were waiting with a bottle of champagne. How does it feel to be a free man? Carl asked. Expensive, I replied, but worth it. What's next? I looked up at the courthouse steps, where I'd just walked away from the biggest fight of my life as the undisputed winner. Next, we rebuild. Parish Electrical is going to be bigger and better than ever. And if Beth ever comes back? I smiled, thinking about the non-disclosure agreement she'd signed and the criminal evidence I still had in my files. She won't, because now she knows what happens when you try to short-circuit James Parish. We walked down the courthouse steps together, 3 friends who'd weathered a storm and come out stronger on the other side. Behind us, the courthouse clock struck 12, marking the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. The power was back on, and this time, I was the one controlling the switch.